Morning, all. Some of you will notice that I'm not Jonathan Montejano. Jonathan's sick, and so I hope he feels better soon. One of the things that I love about our church is how committed we are to raising up people in ministry and in leadership positions. And I'm sorry that you don't get to hear from Jonathan this morning, but I have a feeling that sometime in the next couple of weeks, the youth group will be talking about how Jesus calmed the storm. Okay. I thought maybe when you were warmed up for somebody else, you'd laugh at the jokes, but no. What are some of the things you're good at? Maybe you're good at math, or maybe you're good at basketball, or maybe you're good at cooking. I have a couple of things that I'm good at, and I like to watch videos to get better at them. Like I've been watching a lot of videos on spey casting, which is one of those big rods that you use with two hands. I also watch some videos on cooking because I like to cook. I watch videos on home repair because I enjoy being frustrated. And one of the things that I've noted in these videos is that they present the best case scenario. You know, like how to replace your garbage disposal in 3 minutes or less. You know, and I watch the video, then I try it, and it's a 3-day project, and Megan has to leave the house. They're carefully chosen examples, and so you watch these things, or maybe you're good at something, but then what if something goes wrong? What if you realize that you can change out a garbage disposal in 3 minutes if you have the right tool? The changing out a garbage disposal in 3 minutes tool, which you do not have. Or you're trying to do spey casting and recognize that it was really easy when the guy who had a lot of experience did it. It's different when you do it. Even the stuff that I'm good at. Sometimes I'm in a situation and I'm like, I don't really know what to do here. But there you are. You got to answer the question on the final, and you don't even understand the question. You've never seen a patient respond like this before. You've used your best parenting techniques, and it still ain't working. The sink is still leaking. What do you do then? You either give up or you grow. And whichever choice you make, it will reveal a lot about you and ultimately a lot about your faith. And that's what's going on in the story this morning. So we're going to look at Mark chapter 4, verses 35 through 41. The story actually occurs in a couple of the Gospels, but we're going to Mark. Mark writes, "That day when evening came, he," that's Jesus, "said to his disciples, 'Let's go over to the other side.' Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along, just as he was, in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said to him, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him.'" So for some of you, this is a really familiar story, and you already have the 3 points in your head, and you're thinking about lunch. For others of you, maybe you've never heard this story before, and it's brand new. Whichever one you're in, let me see what I can do with this for you. So, because context is king, let's explain where we are in the passage. So at this point, Jesus has been teaching in a boat from a cove on the Sea of Galilee. He's basically been attracting more and more people, and it's hard for him to be heard, and there's a couple of natural little amphitheater type things around Capernaum at the north end of the lake. I hope to take you there someday. And so in order to be heard, Jesus just puts out in a boat a little way so that he can address the whole crowds that are there. And so when he gets through talking, and that's where we're at this point. And so he's been sharing a bunch of parables. Parables are basically just stories that have a meaning behind them. So he's been talking about farmers and soils and mustard seeds and lamps, and they weren't easy to understand. In fact, most of the people were leaning over to their neighbors going, "I don't understand what he's talking about." They're like, "I don't know." So people were just trying to figure out what he was trying to say, what he was trying to teach them. But more importantly, they were trying to figure out just exactly who he really was. Is he a good teacher, or is he something more? And if he was something more, what could that something more be? Is he going to be a political leader that's going to lead an insurrection? Or could he even be the Messiah? And that's when we pick up the story. So after he's done teaching, that day when the evening came, he said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. So they're up at the top of the lake. They're basically going to go over to the east side. The Sea of Galilee is pretty big. It's 13 miles long, 8 miles wide at the longest. So they have to go over open water to get to this thing. They're not along the shore. They're probably running 2 miles across the middle of the lake. And so they leave the crowd behind him. They took him along just as he was in the boat. There are also other boats with him. And while they're out there, a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. So storms are not unknown on lakes or on the Sea of Galilee, but a really big one comes up. And this is pretty noteworthy. For the people that were with Jesus, this is a fairly routine trip. They spent their lives on this lake. They were fishermen. They were out on this lake every single day. They knew how to handle these boats. They knew how to handle these boats in all kinds of weather and in all kinds of situations. They had seen it all. But this was a really big storm, and they were in trouble. The boat was being swamped. I mean, there's not really high sides. You're down pretty low. The water was coming into the boat. They were in danger of being swamped. They knew that they were in trouble. And they had passed the point of when their own gifts and talents would help them to know what to do. They had lost control. It's like when I'm trying to replace the garbage disposal. If I have to get beyond duct tape and a screwdriver, I realize I am past my limits. They had lost control. This is a bad situation. Well, how did they get into this? Did they get into the situation because of their own bad judgment? Did they forget to check the weather? Are they being punished for something? No. Jesus told them to go. Jesus told them to go across the lake. Jesus knew there was going to be a storm. They didn't do anything wrong. They were actually being obedient to Jesus. Now, a lot of times, we think when things are tough, that means that something is wrong. But in reality, when things are tough, what that means is this is just life. This is how life goes. And sometimes when things are tough, you have a chance to grow in your faith or to put your faith into practice, because faith is really easy to have until you actually need it. So they are in this precarious positions, and what are their options? Well, whatever their options were, they chose panic. And in the midst of the panic, where is Jesus? Well, it tells us Jesus was in the stern of the boat, sleeping on a cushion. The thing to note is that he was there. He was in the boat with them. He hadn't abandoned them. He didn't send them off alone. He didn't say, you guys take the boat, I'm going to walk because it's safer. There's a big storm coming up. Jesus was in the boat with them, but he's asleep. He's not responding the way they think that he should respond. And you can tell that they find this rather irritating. And so, but I wonder if Jesus isn't asleep, one, because he's fully human and he's exhausted, but I wonder if Jesus isn't asleep because he's like, you know what? They may not know this, but they can handle this. I put them on this journey. I'm with them. There's going to be wind and waves. There will be some moments where it feels dire. They might even feel like they're being swamped. They might even feel like they're sinking, and they wonder how much more they can take. But I'm still here. I just wonder if Jesus knows they can and they will grow in this, or they'll give up. And actually, if you step out for just a minute, isn't it somewhat reassuring at some level that Jesus is not running around like a chicken with his head cut off? I mean, wouldn't that be far more disturbed if Jesus was running around going, we'll all be killed, we'll all be killed? So the disciples woke him up, And they said to him, I love it when the disciples state the obvious. Teacher, don't you care if we drown? And if you think about it, what the disciples are really saying is, we can't do this on our own. Which is sort of the beginning of faith, isn't it? It's that moment or recovery when you come to the point where you realize, I can't do this by myself. My gifts, my talents will only take me so far, and I will reach the point in the storm where I have to have some help. But they look at Jesus and they're like, do you not understand how serious this is, Jesus? We need your help, even if we don't understand what type of help that's going to be. And I love Jesus' response because it tells us so much about how Jesus looks at us, how Jesus pays attention to us, how Jesus knows what we need, and how Jesus comes through. He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. I don't know how you are when you get woken up, but Jesus' first response wasn't irritation. Jesus' response was to take care of their fear. Jesus' response was to help them in the situation that they asked for help in. And notice that when Jesus says, peace, be still, it's instantaneous. Last night I went for a walk, with the dog, and I looked out west in our neighborhood, and I saw the end of the front. I'm like, okay, 20 minutes from now, it's going to be sunny. That's not what happened. They didn't all of a sudden look west and go, okay, the storm is already over, we're going to be fine. As soon as Jesus said, peace, be still, the storm broke, and the winds died down, and it was completely calm. Jesus addresses their need, and it happens instantaneously. And then he said to his disciples, and I'm not going to read it this time because I want you to supply the tone of voice. What tone of voice do you think Jesus uses here? Because tone of voice is everything. Okay, I am going to read it, but I'm going to read it in the tone of voice that I think Jesus used. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? I think it was much more of a question than a condemnation. I think Jesus is like, all these things I've been showing you, do you still not get it? Look deeper here. Their response was to be terrified. And they asked each other, who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. I mean, look at their response. Their response was, man, that was awesome. Do it again, Jesus. Their response wasn't, hallelujah, we're rescued. Their response wasn't, we knew you could do this, Jesus. Their response was sheer terror. Why? Because I think they realized that they underestimated the guy. I think they looked around and they're like, this is not any normal dude. Who is this? That even the wind and the waves obey. And that's really the question that comes down to us, isn't it? Who is this? We're in this series on Rediscovering Jesus, taking a hard look at who Jesus really is. And we get to these miracles, they're called the nature miracles, because I want us to consider who is this guy that he can handle all of the elements. Mark begins with this verse, Mark 1:1. The beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God. So Mark tells you what his thesis is at the beginning. Every part of the story in the gospel is told so that you will understand who Jesus is. That you will see that Jesus is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God. And Mark just keeps peeling back the layers of the onion to show you that this is the Messiah, this is God. And so Mark intentionally ends the story with this question, who is this guy? And Mark's like, this is what I'm trying to tell you. That's the question that I want you to ask so that you can understand who it is. Because Mark keeps showing us that Jesus is more than a good teacher. He's the Son of God. And so in this story, calming the storm isn't just a demonstration of power. It's supposed to be an epiphany. It's an unveiling. It's a revealing. They get to see for one very brief moment just exactly who Jesus is. It's like the veil is torn back and they get a picture of who Jesus is, and they're like, that's incredible. Because this whole story, if you think about it, this whole story is supposed to remind us of something. And it's so great that Brendan, that we read earlier in our responsive reading from Genesis, because Genesis begins with the Holy Spirit brooding over the waters. And the waters are in complete chaos. And God speaks, and form comes. God speaks, and the chaos is taken care of. That's what we're supposed to be remembering. When we hear that Jesus is out with his disciples on the water, it's chaotic. And Jesus speaks, and the waters are calmed. Who is the one who calms the waters? Who is the one that brings peace out of chaos? Who is the one that brings form out of formlessness? Who is the one that brings hope out of hopelessness? It's God. And that's why Mark reminds us who this person is. Only God can calm the chaos. We get this picture of this personal living God who intervenes in people's lives. And I love to say, last week we talked about the leper and the personal need that he had. It was just something for him. And I love to look at it in these terms. There is nothing that is too small in your life for Jesus to care about. Nothing too trivial that Jesus will ever go, that's just so small, I couldn't care less about that thing. There's also, the story this week teaches us, there's nothing that's too large for him to handle. There's no storm, there's no trial, there's no temptation, there's no addiction in your life that is too big for Jesus to handle. The other thing to consider is that sometimes God leads his people into storms and difficulties, because it's in the storms and it's in the difficulties that we see who God really is, and we figure out who we are. God often reveals himself to us when we're in the middle of the storms. And when we're in the middle of the storms, God still speaks peace. The situation may not change, but we can. God can remind us that he's present, and he will give us his peace that passes all understanding, even if the storms keep raging around us. And one of the things I was thinking about, I was looking at this, is that this really confronts us with whether we are following God so that we can have this easy, pleasant, middle-class life, or are we following God because he has the words of eternal life, and we haven't found those anywhere else. And we're available to be used by him, even if it's inconvenient, or even if it takes us out of our comfort zone, even if it moves us beyond our skill set. I mean, that's the question that I ask myself. Am I in this because Jesus helps me have this pleasant middle-class life where I just pray people leave me alone and I can just do what I want to? Or am I following Jesus because he's the only person that has shown me peace and joy and hope? And it's worth following him, because the deeper I go with Jesus, the more I find those things. Why are we following Jesus? And do we shirk away from things because we don't want life to be hard? I mean, it's kind of what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Or in the words of the epistle of James, consider it all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, that you might be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Sometimes the storms of our lives are an opportunity for us to go deeper with God. Or we can just panic. This story transformed so many things in the world. It had an enormous impact on architecture, which is not readily apparent until I point it out to you, and then you'll be like, oh my goodness. This story about the people of God being in a boat that is tossed around on the sea in the presence of God who saves them is what most churches are designed around. See, even in a historical Protestant church, but certainly if you grew up in the liturgical church, if you grew up in the Catholic Church or the Lutheran Church or the Anglican Church, most of those churches are very predictable. They are long and narrow where the congregation sits. There's a portion on the end that has the altar or those types of things, and they usually have a high peaked roof. The place where the congregation sits, that long, narrow place with the peaked roof, is called the nave. It comes from the same root as our word navy. It's a ship. When you come to church, you're sitting in a boat because the pointed roof is supposed to remind you of the keel of the boat. Coming to church reminds us that we are in the boat and God is present with us. Storms will come up. And we get to the end of our experience, or we get to the end of our expertise, we get to the end of our knowledge, but Jesus never leaves us alone. God is with us. He might not be present in the way that we had hoped for, but he's still there. And we have a choice. We can grow in our faith and our understanding of who Jesus is, or we can give up. But every time we come to church, the building itself is a visual reminder of the truth of this story. We are in the boat, and Jesus is saving us.